President Biden and his White House messaging team have started to use a term that might seem inflammatory. The term is semi-fascism. Recently, at a private reception, he said the following, quote, "And what we're seeing now is either the beginning or the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy. It's not just Trump. It's the entire philosophy that underpins its, I'm going to say something, it's almost like semi-fascism, the way in which it deals," end quote. Now, yesterday, White House spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre tried to explain what that means.
When we talk about semi-fascism and you talk about the attack on our democracy, that's what we're talking about, right? An attack on our democracy. That's what we're seeing. Attack on our freedoms. That's what we're seeing from the MAGA Republicans in Congress. That is what they're doing.
Is that a good definition or not? Joining me now to discuss this is Larry Taunton. He's an author, a columnist, and the executive director of the Fixed Point Foundation. He's a student of Soviet history and how their leaders targeted political opponents, and knows a little something about fascism. Larry, welcome to Washington Watch.
How you doing, Joseph?
Great. We're glad to have you. First, let's start. What is fascism?
Well, first I have to say that whoever is responsible for typing out, and quoting Joe Biden, they did a brilliant job. I even love the way you read it. I mean, you read it as incompetently as he said it. But let me just simply say this, that historically speaking, historians have often, considered a fascism an expression of the extreme right, and communism and Marxism an expression of the extreme left. But much more recent post-Soviet scholarship really considers them expressions of the same worldview. And that is to say, they're both godless, they're both totalitarian, they both require strict controls of the economy. Both of them have strong strains of anti-Semitism. Both are anti-democratic. And, so I've had a little bit of fun on Twitter and elsewhere simply asking leftists, when you say fascist, what do you mean? Give me a definition. And I've yet to get an answer to that question.
Well, in light of that, why do you think it's a term that is bandied about so frequently, yet, at least in your experience, people are unwilling to define it?
Well, I think that one of the reasons, Joseph, is because the left has had a love affair, for the past century with socialism, with Marxism. And they were very reluctant to condemn it the way they condemned Nazism in Germany, Hitler's Germany. Even after the horrors of Stalinist Russia became widely known. I mean, you had figures like Walter Duranty for the New York Times, who won infamously. He won a Pulitzer Prize, which has never been revoked, for his lying. We now know he was an instrument of the Soviet regime, for his lying about the famines in Soviet Russia. We have figures like George Bernard Shaw, who was a hardcore communist. And when asked, if Stalin was killing people, he said, well, yes, but he's killing the right people, meaning that the left has always been very reluctant to condemn Marxism and communism. And when they're forced into a corner to discuss things like genocides, they usually say, well, it's simply because, Stalin or, Mao got communism and Marxism wrong. Whereas when it comes to fascism, they've always been ready to bandy that term about as a epithet, as a way of condemning their ideological opponent. So that's exactly what they're doing here. They've not offered any kind of working definition. They just simply are labeling anybody who voted for Trump. And I don't care what Biden said today. Biden walked back his remarks today. But the reality is they're calling anybody who voted for Trump a fascist. And they've yet to tell us what they mean by that.
Well, in fairness, we can't even define woman anymore. So terms like fascism are much more complicated. And so I suppose we shouldn't be surprised at the difficulty of defining those. But from your From your perspective, are we facing a threat of fascism in America today?
Well, first of all, let me say this. I'm going to modify your comment slightly, Joseph. I think that you and I, not we, I think you and I know exactly what a woman is. I think it's the fascist left, and I say that by way of answering your question. I do think we face a fascist threat in this country, but it's not coming from the direction the media would have you believe. We are seeing fascism historically was defined as a kind of strict regimentation of the economy for the purpose of war, by a government, and that it contained perhaps elements of anti-Semitism, maybe some elements of racism, and that it saw things slightly differently in economic terms. But what we are actually seeing in this country looks very fascist. We are seeing the government slowly taking the reins of power across the board in the economy. We're seeing the government and the economy and companies weaponized against roughly 80 million American people. And when we're talking about, racist elements, that's also coming out of the left. I mean, the whole white privilege, the condemnation of white people, the victimization of people of color, this is all very racist, and it's coming out of the left.
Larry Taunton, in less than a minute now, what's the correct response when somebody accuses us of being a fascist?
Well, I would push on them a little bit and ask them, just as I've been asking, what do you mean by that? And typically what they will say to that is, well, I mean Trump voters. But then I just take that's just going, one step back. Okay, then what are Trump voters actually doing that you think is fascist? I mean, name something that they're actually credibly doing. The fact is, Joseph, that everything the left is calling fascist is exactly what the left is doing.
Well, it does seem that just being upset with what the left is doing, not wanting your child to be exposed to drag queens in third grade, being upset by that
is a threat to democracy.
That is a threat to democracy. Larry Taunton, Fixed Point Foundation, thanks for your time today.
Hey, delighted to see you.